The clerk called the case number, and every head in the courtroom turned to look at the woman sitting alone at the respondent's table. She was wearing a second-hand parka she hadn't bothered to take off, a cotton blouse with a small coffee stain near the collar, and boots that had survived 3 Toronto winters too many. Her ex-husband, Owen Prescott, leaned toward his girlfriend and said, loud enough for the gallery microphone to catch, "She probably took the TTC here. I hope she brought exact change." The girlfriend, a 25-year-old lifestyle influencer named Tiffany Langford, covered her mouth and laughed. The judge hadn't even spoken yet, and they were already celebrating. They thought this was a formality. They thought they were watching a broke immigrant's daughter lose her last claim to a life she never deserved. But they didn't know that the woman in the stained blouse had wired $14 million to a holding company at 7 that morning. They didn't know that in exactly 12 minutes the doors behind them would open, and the entire power structure of this room would collapse. Her name was Renata Vieira. And she was not the victim. She was the architect. The Superior Court of Justice on University Avenue smelled the way all government buildings smell in January: wet wool, industrial cleaning solution, and the faint desperation of people whose lives were about to be decided by strangers. Renata sat with her hands folded on the table, her back straight despite every instinct telling her to curl inward. She had a single manila folder in front of her. No laptop, no paralegal, no water pitcher. Across the aisle, Owen's side looked like a war room. His lawyer, Douglas Hargrove of Hargrove, Sinclair and Webb, had spread 3 bankers' boxes of documents across the table. 2 junior associates flanked him like bodyguards. A tablet displayed what appeared to be a PowerPoint presentation. Owen himself sat in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, his hair freshly cut, his jaw set in the expression of a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. Tiffany was seated in the gallery directly behind him, which was technically against protocol. But no one had asked her to move. She was wearing a white Hermes scarf and typing on her phone with long acrylic nails that clicked against the screen like tiny hammers. "Your Honor," Douglas Hargrove began, standing with the practiced ease of a man who billed $900 an hour. "My client has been more than generous. He has offered Mrs. Prescott a lump sum of $8,000 and 60 days to vacate the marital residence. She has refused. We believe she is acting in bad faith, motivated by spite rather than any legitimate financial claim." Renata didn't flinch. She had trained herself not to flinch. 5 years of marriage to Owen Prescott had been an education in endurance. "Mrs. Prescott," Justice Caldwell said, peering over her reading glasses, "I see you are self-represented. I want to remind you that Mr. Hargrove is an experienced family law attorney. Are you certain you wish to proceed without counsel?" "I can't afford counsel, Your Honor," Renata said. Her voice was quiet but steady, and it carried to every corner of the room. Owen snorted. He actually snorted like a horse dismissing a fly. He whispered something to Hargrove, who suppressed a smile. "Your Honor, if I may," Hargrove continued, "the respondent contributed no financial assets to this marriage. The home on Summerhill Avenue was purchased solely in my client's name. The vehicle is leased under his company. His business, Prescott Hospitality Group, was incorporated 3 years before the marriage. Mrs. Prescott was, to put it plainly, a dependent, a passenger." The word landed like a slap. Renata's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the judge. "She cooked," Owen muttered, loud enough for the microphone. "That was about it." Tiffany giggled from the gallery. The sound was sharp and bright like breaking glass. What they saw was a woman who had spent 4 years in the kitchen of Owen's flagship restaurant, Aurum, on King Street West. They saw the wife who prepped the mise en place at 5 in the morning, who developed the tasting menus that earned them a spot on Canada's best restaurants list, who hosted the private events that landed Owen profiles in Toronto Life and the Globe and Mail. They saw a quiet, serious woman with flour under her fingernails and no social media presence. What they did not see was the truth. They did not know that before Renata met Owen at a food festival in Montreal, she had been the anonymous culinary consultant behind the restructuring of 3 Michelin-starred kitchens in London and Lyon. They did not know that she held a controlling interest in Vieira Capital, a private investment firm registered in Zurich, managed by her late father's estate lawyer, a fund currently valued at just over $90 million, built on her father's pharmaceutical patents and her own strategic acquisitions over the past decade. She had never told Owen about the money. She had wanted to be loved for herself, for her mind, her cooking, her presence, not for a number on a balance sheet. By the time she realized Owen loved nothing that didn't come with a price tag, she was already married, already trapped in the machinery of his ego. When he filed for divorce and moved Tiffany into the house while Renata was visiting her mother in Sao Paulo, she decided to let him think he was winning. She let him think she was broken. Until today. "Mrs. Prescott," Justice Caldwell said, "do you have any documentation to support a claim to the marital assets?" Renata opened her manila folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper handwritten. Your Honor, I have a list of my contributions to Prescott Hospitality Group. I developed every menu. I trained the kitchen staff. I sourced the suppliers. I negotiated the produce contracts that saved the company $40,000 a year annual. Hargrove cut in smoothly. Is your name on any corporate documents? No. Did you sign a partnership agreement? No. Then this is a waste of the court's time. Your Honor, we move for summary judgment. Owen stretched his legs under the table, crossing his ankles. He looked at Renata with the lazy contempt of a man who had already mentally redecorated her side of the closet. Mrs. Prescott, the judge said, and there was a note of resignation in her voice. Without documented financial contributions or a challenge to the prenuptial agreement, I'm inclined to— Your Honor. Renata's voice cut through the room. I have a challenge to the prenuptial agreement, but I need 2 more minutes to present it. Owen rolled his eyes. She's stalling. Quiet, Mr. Prescott, the judge said. Renata looked at the clock on the wall. 9:58. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy oak doors at the back of courtroom 403 opened. The sound was not loud, but it was definitive, the kind of sound that rearranges a room. 3 people walked in, 2 women and 1 man. The women wore identical navy suits so precisely tailored they looked like armor. The man was older, perhaps 65, with a silver beard trimmed to military precision and a bearing that suggested he had been in rooms far more consequential than this one. He carried a single leather portfolio embossed with a crest that Douglas Hargrove recognized immediately. Hargrove went pale. He actually went pale, the color draining from his face like water from a cracked glass. The older man walked directly to Renata's table. He placed the portfolio down, opened it, and withdrew a document bound in dark green leather. Then he turned to the judge and inclined his head. Your Honor, he said. His voice was deep, unhurried, and carried the faint trace of a Swiss-German accent. My name is Emile Hoffmann. I am the managing director of Hoffmann, Tessier and Roche, international counsel based in Geneva and Toronto. The room went silent. Hoffmann, Tessier and Roche was not a firm you hired for a divorce. It was the firm that handled sovereign wealth disputes and cross-border mergers. It was the firm that had represented the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. It was the firm Douglas Hargrove's partners spoke about the way medical students spoke about the Mayo Clinic. Mr. Hoffmann, Justice Caldwell said, visibly surprised, you are appearing on behalf of the respondent. I am appearing on behalf of Vieira Capital Holdings. Emile said, of which the respondent, Ms. Renata Vieira, is the sole principal and controlling shareholder. Owen laughed. It was a reflex, a nervous bark. Vieira Capital? She doesn't have a capital, she doesn't have a savings account. Emile did not look at Owen. He addressed the judge as if Owen were a piece of furniture. Your Honor, I have here a certified document from the Ontario Securities Commission confirming that Vieira Capital Holdings, acting through a subsidiary called Lakeshore Ventures Inc., has this morning completed the acquisition of all outstanding debt obligations of Prescott Hospitality Group. We have also acquired 51% of the voting shares through a private placement that Mr. Prescott himself initiated 3 weeks ago. Owen stood up. His chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a scream. No. Lakeshore Ventures? That was a venture capital group. I pitched them. They did love the brand, Renata said. She was standing now and her posture had changed. The slump was gone. Her chin was lifted. The quiet, defeated woman had vanished, replaced by someone whose stillness was not weakness but control. They loved it so much they bought it. I bought it, Owen. Every dollar of debt you racked up renovating that restaurant to impress food bloggers. Every line of credit you maxed out buying Tiffany that Range Rover. I own all of it now. This is fraud, Hargrove shouted, though his voice lacked its earlier authority. My client was deceived. Your client, Emile corrected, his tone surgical, sold equity in his company to a willing buyer at fair market value. The identity of the buyer is not a disclosure requirement under the Ontario Business Corporations Act. If Mr. Prescott failed to conduct due diligence, that is a reflection of his business acumen, not a legal deficiency on our part. Emile placed a second document before the judge. Furthermore, Your Honor, regarding the prenuptial agreement. Ms. Vieira signed the prenup without independent legal advice, which Mr. Prescott's own counsel at the time acknowledged in an email that we have obtained through discovery. Under Ontario family law, a domestic contract signed without independent legal advice is voidable. We are filing to have it set aside. Justice Caldwell read the documents. She read them carefully, turning each page with deliberate patience. When she looked up, there was something in her expression that might have been the faintest trace of a smile. Mr. Hargrove, she said, it appears your client has significantly misrepresented his financial position and the contributions of his spouse. I am granting a continuance pending a full forensic audit of Prescott Hospitality Group's finances. You can't, Owen shouted. I can and I am. Additionally, I am issuing a Mareva injunction freezing all of Mr. Prescott's personal and corporate accounts effective immediately. Owen's face went white. I have payroll. I have suppliers. I have. Then I suggest you speak with your new majority shareholder, the judge said, nodding at Renata. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The sound was small and final like a coffin nail. Owen stood paralyzed as the courtroom erupted into whispered chaos. Hargrove was already on his phone, presumably calling his malpractice insurer. Tiffany was staring at Renata with an expression that had shifted from contempt to something closer to animal fear. Renata gathered her manila folder, the one with the single handwritten page, and tucked into Emile. Is the car ready? Waiting on University Avenue, Miss Vieira. The team is already at the restaurant. Good. Renata looked down at her stained blouse, then unbuttoned her parka and draped it over the chair. Underneath, the blouse was actually raw silk. The stain was coffee, yes, but the blouse was worth $600. She hadn't bothered to change it because she hadn't needed to impress anyone. She walked toward the doors. As she passed Owen, she paused, not to gloat, not to sneer. She looked at him the way you look at a broken appliance you finally decided to throw away. You once told me I was nothing without your kitchen, she said quietly. But Owen, I built that kitchen. Every recipe, every technique, every supplier relationship. You just stood at the pass and yelled. She walked out. The January wind hit her face as she stepped onto University Avenue, and for the first time in 5 years the cold felt clean. The drive to Orem took 11 minutes. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse on King West, all exposed brick and copper fixtures, the kind of place that charged $42 for a pasta course and made you feel grateful for the privilege. Owen had leased the space at an absurd rate because he liked the address. The overhead was killing the business, but he had never listened when Renata told him that. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. Renata stepped out. She had changed in the car, a clean white blouse, a tailored blazer, the color of charcoal, simple gold earrings. She looked like someone who owned things. The maitre d', a young man named Philippe who had always been polite to Renata when she came in with flour on her apron, was standing by the door. He looked confused. Mrs. Prescott? It's Vieira, she said. Mrs. Vieira. Philippe, is the kitchen staff here? Yes, ma'am. Prep started at 8. But what? Good. I need everyone in the dining room in 5 minutes, front and back of house. And Philippe? Mr. Prescott is not to enter the building until further notice. Philippe's eyes went wide, but he nodded. He was a smart young man. He could feel which way the wind was blowing. Renata walked through the restaurant. She ran her fingers along the bar top, the one she had helped Owen pick out from a reclaimed wood dealer in Muskoka. She passed the open kitchen, where the sous chef, a woman named Ingrid, looked up from her prep station with surprise. Renata, what are you doing here? Owen said you weren't allowed. Owen doesn't make that decision anymore, Renata said. Dining room, 5 minutes. The staff gathered in the main dining area, still in their aprons and chef's coats. There were 14 of them, line cooks, servers, a sommelier, dishwashers. They looked nervous. They had heard rumors. In the restaurant industry, rumors traveled faster than fire. Renata stood at the head of the room, near the window that overlooked King Street. My name is Renata Vieira, she said. Most of you know me as Owen's ex-wife. The woman who used to come in early and leave late. The woman who developed the menus you cook every night. She paused. As of this morning, I am the majority owner of Prescott Hospitality Group. Owen is no longer in charge of this restaurant or any of its operations. Silence. Then Ingrid, the sous chef, spoke. You own Orem? I own the company that owns Orem, its debt and its future. Which brings me to why I'm here. Renata's voice was firm but not unkind. This restaurant has been losing money for 18 months. Owen has been covering the shortfall by maxing out lines of credit and taking cash advances. Some of you haven't received your full pay in weeks. I know this because I've seen the books. Murmurs rippled through the group. A dishwasher named Marco crossed his arms and nodded slowly. Here's what's going to happen, Renata continued. Every outstanding payroll will be settled by end of business today. Benefits will be reinstated. The menu is being overhauled. I'll be working with Ingrid and the kitchen team starting tomorrow. We are going to make this restaurant what it should have been from the beginning. She looked around the room. Anyone who wants to stay, stays. Anyone who wants to leave, I'll write you a reference letter personally. But if you stay, you work for me now, and I don't yell. Ingrid was the first to speak. I'm in. One by one, the others nodded. Marco, the dishwasher, actually smiled. It was the first time Renata had seen him smile in 3 years. Then the front door banged open. Owen stormed in, his tie loosened, his face flushed red despite the January cold. He had taken an Uber. His corporate card had been declined twice before he remembered he had cash in his wallet. Tiffany was not with him. She had taken a separate car to the condo on Harvard Street, presumably to start packing. Get away from my staff, Owen shouted, striding toward Renata. Philippe stepped in front of him. Philippe was 23 and weighed perhaps 150 pounds, but he stood firm. "Sir, Ms. Vieira has asked that you not enter the premises." "She's not. This is my restaurant." "It was your restaurant," Renata said from across the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Sit down, Owen. You're making a scene in front of your employees." "They're my employees. They're mine. Check the share register." Owen looked around the dining room. 14 faces looked back at him. Not one of them looked sympathetic. He had yelled at every single person in this room at least once. He had thrown a saucepan at Marco. He had made Ingrid cry on Christmas Eve because the risotto was too al dente. He had docked a server's pay for dropping a bread basket. "This isn't over," Owen hissed. "Actually it is," Renata said. She walked toward him and stopped 3 feet away. "But since you're here, let me tell you what I found in the books. The Harvard Street condo that you told Tiffany you bought for her, it's leased under the company. Which means it's mine now. Tiffany has 72 hours to vacate." Owen's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't." "I would. I also found the account you opened in Barbados. The one labeled marketing consultancy. The one you've been funneling cash into for the last year. $47,000, Owen. You told the court you couldn't afford alimony." The blood drained from Owen's face. "The forensic auditors start tomorrow," Renata said. "If I were you, I would get a very good criminal lawyer. Douglas Hargrove does family law. You're going to need someone who does fraud." Owen opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He looked like a fish pulled from the lake, gasping on the dock. "Why?" he finally whispered. "Why all this? Why not just leave?" Renata looked at him for a long moment. The anger she had carried for 5 years was still there, but it was quiet now, controlled. It had been refined into something harder and more useful than rage. "Because you didn't just leave me, Owen. You erased me. You took my recipes and put your name on them. You told every food critic in Toronto that you were the creative genius and I was just the prep cook. You told Tiffany I was boring. You told your mother I was a gold digger from Brazil who trapped you into marriage." She stepped closer. "I cooked for you. I cleaned for you. I built your reputation dish by dish, and you repaid me by bringing your girlfriend into my kitchen and telling her she could redecorate." She looked at the staff. They were watching, rapt. "I didn't do this for revenge, Owen. I did this because this restaurant deserves someone who actually cares about the food. About the people. About the work. You never cared about any of it. You just wanted the Instagram photos and the magazine covers." Owen stared at her. For the first time he seemed to actually see her. Not the quiet wife, not the prep cook, not the woman he had dismissed and discarded. He saw someone who had been paying attention the entire time. Someone who had been planning while he was performing. "Get out of my restaurant," Renata said softly. "Philippe will call you a cab." Owen left. He didn't slam the door. He didn't make a speech. He just walked out into the cold, a man who had finally realized that the person he had been stepping on was the ground itself. 3 months later, the sign above the door on King Street West no longer read Aurum. It read Raízes, Portuguese for roots. The interior had been stripped of Owen's pretentious copper fixtures and replaced with warm wood, handmade ceramics, and a long communal table that ran the length of the room. The kitchen was still open, but now it was truly open. Guests could walk up, ask questions, watch Ingrid and Renata work side by side. The menu was a love letter to every cuisine Renata had ever studied: Brazilian, French, Japanese, Portuguese, filtered through the lens of Ontario's seasons. The opening review in the Globe and Mail called it the most exciting restaurant to open in Toronto in a decade. The Toronto Star gave it 4 stars and said the braised short rib with chimichurri and pickled ramps was reason enough to believe in second chances. Reservations were booked 3 months out. Every member of the original staff had stayed. Marco, the dishwasher, was now training as a line cook. Philippe had been promoted to general manager. Ingrid had been given a partnership stake and the title of executive chef. Owen Prescott was living in his mother's basement in Mississauga. His accounts were still frozen pending the fraud investigation. The Barbados account had been reported to the CRA, and the preliminary audit suggested the shortfall was closer to $90,000, not $47,000. His lawyer had advised him to cooperate fully and hope for a conditional discharge. Tiffany had moved to Vancouver. Her Instagram following had dropped by 60% after someone, nobody knew who, had leaked the court transcripts. She was now promoting teeth whitening kits and had not mentioned Owen's name in 4 months. On a Tuesday evening in April, Renata was in the kitchen at Raízes, plating the final course of a private dinner for a group of investors. Her phone buzzed. She wiped her hands on her apron and checked the screen. It was a text from Emile Hoffman. The subject line read, "Canadian Restaurant Awards shortlist announced." Renata opened it. Raízes had been nominated for Best New Restaurant in Canada. She set the phone down, picked up her plating tweezers, and placed a single edible flower on the dish. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. At that same moment in a basement apartment in Mississauga, Owen Prescott was eating instant ramen from a styrofoam cup. The television was on. A local news segment was showing footage of Raiz's packed dining room, the camera lingering on the open kitchen where a woman in a white chef's coat was working with quiet, focused intensity. And in Toronto's food scene tonight, the anchor said, the restaurant everyone is talking about, Raiz's on King Street West, has been nominated for Best New Restaurant at the Canadian Restaurant Awards. Owner and head chef Renata Vieira, formerly known in the industry only as a behind-the-scenes figure, has emerged as one of the most exciting culinary voices in the country. Owen stared at the screen. He watched the woman he had called boring. The woman he had told couldn't run a business. The woman whose recipes he had stolen and whose name he had erased from every menu, every interview, every award application. She was standing in her kitchen. Her kitchen. The light caught the steam rising from a pan, and for a moment she looked like she was standing in a cloud. Owen set down his ramen. He didn't finish it. He turned off the television and sat in the dark for a long time. Back on King Street, the last guests were leaving Raiz's. Renata walked them to the door, thanked them personally, and watched them step into the spring night. The streetcar rumbled past, the city hummed, Philippe locked up, Ingrid wiped down the pass, Marco swept the floor whistling. Renata stood alone in the empty dining room. On the wall near the entrance, in a simple wooden frame, hung a photograph. It was a picture of her hands, flour-dusted, scarred from years of kitchen burns, strong, kneading dough on a wooden board. Below it, in small type, was a line her father used to say, "The bread remembers the hands that made it." She turned off the lights, pulled on her coat, and stepped out into the Toronto night. The air was cool and smelled of rain and possibility. She locked the door behind her, slipped the key into her pocket, and walked toward home. She had nowhere to be but exactly where she was. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. What did you think of Renata's story? Was Owen's downfall deserved, or did she go too far? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It truly helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell. We drop new stories every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the quiet one in the room. They might just own the building. See you in the next one.